The AI models and tools that are coming out require updated prompting approaches. Today we're going to look at some of these new tools and the best prompting techniques to use with them. I'm Bill Eastman, and this is the AI for Your Business channel. It's the channel business people can come to quickly learn how they can leverage AI. Click on the subscribe button below to be sure not to miss any tips and tools. The three tools we're reviewing today are reasoning models, agentic tools, and deep research models. OpenAI released reasoning models in the fall to extend the capabilities of their GPT models, and the other AI providers have followed suit. Agentic tools have been available to developers for over a year, but only recently are being released as tools in themselves. And deep research was released by Google in December to be followed by the other AI providers. Let's dive in. So what's a reasoning model? Reasoning models are like an extension of the GPT models underlying products like ChatGPT. But while a GPT model spits out answers off the top of its head, adding reasoning forces the model to think through the questions more carefully before responding. So this additional thinking results in significantly richer and more nuanced answers. But there's a trade-off. Just like you wouldn't send a PhD off for a day to answer a simple question, you don't want to use a reasoning model for a question that a GPT model can answer easily. It takes longer, and it can even give a worse answer if it starts overthinking. But given that you have a question that warrants using a thinking model, you want to prompt it a bit differently than you would for a GPT model. I'll refer you to my episode on GPT prompting to understand the techniques to use with those models. But in general, with these models, you need to be very, very specific, provide the objective, the context, instructions, and examples. But reasoning models are different in that you don't want to give it a lot of instructions. In fact, giving a reasoning model a lot of instructions is like being a micromanager. Just give it a goal and let it cook. Okay, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. There's still some guidelines that you want to follow to really make the most of these models. So first, be very clear and specific on your goal. But at the same time, keep your prompts direct and concise to keep the model focused. And tell the model what questions a good answer would address. You want to provide lots of context. Lay out everything you have: background, supporting documents, discussions, etc. I like first discussing the question with a GPT model like GPT 4.0 and use that discussion to clarify your thoughts and have the model make suggestions. Then you can load the entire conversation as context for the reasoning model, or you can first have the GPT model summarize that conversation and then load that into the context. At the same time, be careful with the context you provide. Throwing superfluous or inaccurate information into the context can be worse than no context at all. And include any constraints for the response, such as your budget, preferences, that sort of thing. Now, you don't need to tell the model how to think through the question. So normal practices like telling it to think step by step or explain its reasoning aren't necessary here. And you should also use delimiters like HTML tags and Markdown to make it easier for the model to break down your prompt. You can even use different types of Markdown for different levels of emphasis. And finally, ask the model to ask clarifying questions before it begins. Now, since these reasoning models are big thinkers, their main value is for complex tasks like planning and decision making. Then for carrying out specifics of a plan, or answering standard questions, you'd use the GPT models. Let's look at an example. You own a small cafe and you're considering expanding by either opening a second location or launching a catering business. You need a thorough decision-making framework that considers market conditions, financial projections, competitive landscape, and operational feasibility. What you see here is simplified. In real life, you're going to provide a lot more context. At the top of your prompt, you've laid out your goal and the issues you want to address. Below that, we have the context. Note that it includes the options to consider and the constraints. We're going to use the O3 Mini High model to respond here. And so we've fed in the prompt and we've kicked it off. And the model begins by asking a clarifying question, which is really just what we want. We're going to respond to that. And we're going to give less detail than you would in real life, but you get the idea. And we kick it off. And it takes a second. And here we have a pretty thorough response. Now, feel free to proceed from here by discussing individual points in more depth or looking at some of the sources that you've used and see if it corresponds to what you're thinking. Let's move on to Agentic Tools. Before we get into prompting for them, I'll review a few to give you a sense of what we're talking about. Check out some of my previous episodes to learn more. Now, ChatGPT tasks allow you to schedule actions to take. For example, you could schedule a task to search websites each morning for a competitor or customer news, then schedule a task 5 minutes later to write a LinkedIn post based on the news. GPTs, they allow you to create an agent to perform a specific action. Examples might include image and video generation, data analysis, working with other office tools, and so on. Now, agentic use cases differ from standard ChatGPT usage in that the model actually executes an action. Instead of going back and forth with the model on a problem you have, you just give it a task, and that's the end of your input. If the model doesn't follow your directions or hallucinates answers, there's no chance to correct it. Therefore, for these agent cases, your prompts must be very carefully designed. Here are a few guidelines. It's going to look like a lot of work, but keep in mind that with agents, all of the work is up front, and then they can operate independently. So let's take a look. Follow this prompt structure. Give a clear objective. Detail the specific task to perform. Give detailed instructions on how to perform the tasks. Provide all the context needed to accurately fulfill the tasks. Provide examples of proper responses. And give guidance on the desired response format. Now, depending upon how complex your task is, you may not have to cover all of these steps. But one piece of advice is to let ChatGPT, or Claude or Gemini, help you to create the prompt. Tell it what you're trying to do and outline the steps above that you want to fill out. And then with a few turns of the conversation, you should come back with something pretty solid. Here's a few more prompts to follow. Be specific and don't leave room for interpretation. It's striking how much latitude these models can take sometimes. Use urgency with language or formatting to focus the model. Make sure it follows your instructions. Break out the sections of the prompt with HTML or Markdown tags to help it think through the problem better. And to reduce hallucinations, you could tell it to answer solely based on the information you've provided in the context. Now, no matter how much work you put in on the initial prompt, it's going to take multiple iterations to work through the bugs. And it can be befuddling when your agent isn't following instructions or is hallucinating responses. So here's a key tip. In those cases, share the incorrect responses with the model. Tell it not to apologize, but to explain why it responded the way it did. Then ask how to prompt to avoid this issue in the future. And that should take you a long way towards addressing these issues. I'll share an example from our episode covering OpenAI GPTs. Here are the instructions used to create a GPT that helps small businesses develop employee policies and handbooks. Once again, these instructions look daunting, but just start by laying out the sections: role, task, execution, data to use, examples, and response format. Then you can work with ChatGPT to fill out the details of each section. I'll include the instructions you see here in the video description to give you a template to work from. Let's finish with deep research. In previous episodes, we covered OpenAI and Google's versions of deep research. These models are specially trained to go into much more depth than a standard GPT model to respond to a query. They're so compute intensive that until a few weeks ago, OpenAI only offered it on its $200 a month plan. So you may only use these models in special situations, but when these special situations arise, they're great. At least in OpenAI's case, Deep research is based on a reasoning model, so a number of the guidelines for reasoning models can be used here as well. Let's take a look. Give plenty of detail on your goal. Lay out your primary and secondary questions to address. Give an overview of what you already know. If applicable, give boundaries on the analysis, for example, time frame, geography, industry, that sort of thing. Load any documents you want to make sure are included in the research. Don't give too much instruction on how to conduct the research. The model can handle that. Give guidance on the output format, the depth and length of the analysis, the structure of the analysis, for example, background, key findings, conclusions. What's the level of explanation? It's for a beginner or an expert or something in between. So here are a few more steps or a few more tips. Don't make the question too broad or it'll give a pretty generic response. And depending upon what you're researching, you may want to ask the model to only use high quality resources and leave out social media, opinion pieces, that sort of thing. And you might want to first discuss your research question with a reasoning model and with it work out an ideal prompt for the research model. And finally, although the recent models have reduced hallucinations, you might want to still consider running the response and sources back through a model like GPT 4.0 and ask if anything looks questionable. So to demonstrate a deep research prompt, we'll use the example of a decision whether to expand a business. You have an artisanal coffee shop in Atlanta and are considering opening a second location in either Charlotte or Nashville. You need a comprehensive market entry analysis comparing these two cities based on demand, competition, customer demographics, cost, and risk. So your prompt includes the goal, primary questions, secondary questions, known information, boundaries for the analysis, sources to prioritize, and output format. And so we're going to enter this into ChatGPT, and we go into ChatGPT, we click on the deep research icon, and you got to be careful here because even on the $20 a month plan, you only get 10 of these a month. So this is going to take a little while to research, so we'll come back to it. All right, and there we see a really solid report. Note that it includes its sources, so you can check them out if you like. One final point. I've been reviewing these prompting techniques using OpenAI's tools, but they apply to Google and Anthropic as well. Okay, that's it for today. Reasoning models, agentic tools, and deep research are powerful, and I hope you now feel equipped to make the most of them. But if you have questions or would like more detail, please leave a comment. Next episode, we're going to look at how AI can help with accounting and managing books. Want to get that covered in time for tax season. So please subscribe to not miss these and other ways to optimize your use of AI. And if you've gotten some value today, please leave a like. Till then, good luck with your business.